Dads are so critical, right? Because I had one of those dads too that was just like, oh, he called me Sniffins, like, oh, Sniffins, you could do anything you to be, So like for the dads out there, it kind of starts with you. So you need to be like Jessica's dad. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Framework Podcast. I'm your host, Trujillo, Limón, and this month on Framework, we're talking about trends in investing. And I'm really excited to be joined by two of my brilliant colleagues, Erin and Jessica Golson. Erin and Jessica, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yes, it's going to be fun. So for our listeners who haven't had the pleasure of meeting either of you yet, can you share a little bit about your journey into the industry?
Sure. I will start us off. And the beautiful thing about our industry is there's a million ways to get here, but I always say people either have a tendency to say they fell into it. And if you're a little bit older in the industry, that is a very common phrase. The other one is you get catapulted into it. And I feel like I'm definitely on the side of the catapult. I grew up with very humble beginnings. I'm born to two teenage parents, so they are not the typical people that were getting financial advisors or financial advice when I was growing up. And much of what I learned was the bad lessons in life, or how people were being taken advantage of, or the bad decisions that if they just would have known there was a better option, they could have had a better result. And I'm the first person to graduate from college. And so I was the first to experience some of the things like, what does it really mean to have a 401k and student loans, and how do you handle these things? And my parents came to me with some questions that they had, that someone was presenting them some options around their life insurance. And I didn't know anything about it, but I did know what they were telling me didn't make a lot of sense. And so I started being curious. I started asking questions, and I met a financial advisor who ultimately got me into this career. And 22 years later, what I found is, if we can do really good work and know that there's all these people that need financial advice out there in education, and we can just spread that knowledge a little bit more to a few more people, then we can make a huge difference, not just in our industry, but in the whole nation and economy. And it's a great thing that we could do the work we get to do.
That's awesome. I would say I didn't exactly fall into it, but I kind of did. I was definitely interested in the markets, just curious, I think from a little kid growing up all the way through college, of just being, impressed at the art and science that it takes to do portfolio management and investing in the market. And I, right out of college, I joined an advisor office, what I like to kind of call as the rookie mistake. I thought I'd be just managing portfolios and investments, but it was actually right before the financial crisis that I started. And so what it did for me is it really helped me see just firsthand the role that an advisor plays in their client's life. And I remember specifically one situation where it was a guy came in, he was about my dad's age, he was approaching retirement. His advisor hadn't managed his risk. And so here he was on the heels of retirement with a portfolio that was down almost 50%. And so he was really making that decision of, do I need to work longer? Do I live on less? And just watching the advisor in the room work with him and kind of coach him and talk him through that. And can't solve that problem in 90 minutes, but he was there and just provided that support. And I think the clarity around, like, here's what we can do from here. And I think, again, the significance was so memorable to me on that. But also as kind of the junior advisor, I knew that there was about 3 to 4 hours put into making that 90 minutes happen. And so from there, I was like, that's where I want to spend my time. How do I alleviate some of that stuff for the advisors so that they can be in that room? Because I saw the impact firsthand.
No, well, thank you both for sharing your stories. It's always my favorite part of these episodes is hearing everybody's story. And Erin, I always love to hear your story and, from where you came up to the success you've been able to see now. So thank you for sharing that also. And so, Jessica, you're working with the advisors to help make their process a little bit easier. So tell us both about what your roles are here at Carson and how your teams work together to make that happen.
Yeah. Well, I oversee, so I'm the Senior Vice President of Investments and Trading. So what that means is really designing the investment platform and the process that goes into supporting that comprehensive financial plan. That's where Erin's team comes in. And so we try to work together to really build out solutions that work, not just strategies that are available.
Yeah. And so I oversee 5 divisions, which I always say are our financial advice divisions, which tie so nicely to Jessica's divisions. They are holding hands, and we are skipping down the road because you can't really do one very well without the other. The 5 teams that I oversee are financial planning, Carson Tax, Carson Insurance, Carson Trust Solutions, and Carson Retirement Plan. So like those are the places we start, right, with the idea of what is it the client really wants and what are they trying to achieve. And one of the things I find so beautiful about the work we do here at Carson is that not all clients are the same, and not all clients want exactly the same solutions or the same answers. And so by us taking that step back and that really cross-functional of my 5 divisions and Jessica's divisions, how do we cross-function across all of them to really look at the human-first approach? What is it the human is wanting, and what is it the desires and goals they have financially? And then how do we all come together to fit it into a way that is understandable, gives the client confidence, conviction in what they do, and then we make those small improvements year over year, month over month, so that we know at the end of the day, the client's getting to their financial goals. And that's really us talking life, which is the best thing about what we get to do.
Yeah, no, I love that's wonderful. That client centered, their goals front and center all the time. I love that approach. But like I said, we're talking about trends in investing this month. And last episode, I got to chat with Jake Bleicher about our women CEO strategy and women CEO fund. So that was really fun. But I really wanted to get your 2 perspectives on it. Let's talk a little bit about, the Carson values as it pertains to women in wealth, and how that our women CEO fund and strategy ties into that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Erin, if you want to go first.
Okay. So I love this because I look at it from the higher level and the planning level than Jessica does. And for me, what the CEO fund means is so much more than the investments. And I love the investments, and I love that we're focusing on the women. But when I look at what does it really mean, it's representation. And representation is the piece that so many of us have been looking for since we, like 3 women who have great jobs, we've been looking for this since we were little girls. And we all know the statistics of, women are less represented and less paid and all these things. But I do think there's a really key piece to, if you think you can be it, well, then you have to see it. And the CEO fund gives us a great place to be like, wait, there's 30 funds in here. There's 30 women in here that I, frankly, don't look at every single stock every day and know who the CEOs are. Even in planning, I don't know that. But what I do know now is there's a place where there's 30 of them. And when I went through that list, I was like, oh, I didn't know that one. I didn't know that one. There was a few that I knew. I've had the pleasure of interviewing Jenny Johnson, who is at Franklin Templeton. I got to do the fireside chat with her last year at Excel Represent, our conference. And, looking at that, like, she is so down to earth. She is a mother. She is a person who has always put her family first and figured out, how do I run a company, a family, multi-generation company, and be CEO of a highly successful firm that is multi-generation. And like, that is representation that is just amazing for us to see. And I hope every little girl out there gets a point to see that, like, more firms give more representation. We bring more light to this. It's going to bring change.
Absolutely. And I think really when we step back, so again, running the investment platform, we can't get stagnant. We've got to have the choices. The world's changing fast. We've got to be able to predict kind of what investors and what advisors are going to need. And so, in some of that reflection, we know the end investor, just like every consumer out there, is so used to this kind of personalized type experience. And so, it was like, it's going to be, I wouldn't say just values-based or ESG, it's personalized. It's that client-centered, which Erin was talking about earlier. And so in imagining kind of our investment platform, we thought, okay, well, at Carson, we have some very strong values, and we have things that we are like truly committed to making the change. And one of those as females, women in wealth management. You've had Julie on. I know you've talked about that a number of times, and we're so committed to that, that it's like, why wouldn't we have something like this, something that aligns with our values? And so it's funny, I went to the team. We've got a ton of just really qualified portfolio managers, equity analysts, and kind of posed as a, if we were to launch a handful of thematic type strategies, which ones would we want to do? And you heard from Jake last week, and that was the very first one he mentioned. But, it was kind of funny. It's a joke of, do we have a man run this strategy? But just as you've probably learned Jake's story, like, it's so unique because he is a full-time single father, has a beautiful daughter and son. But he knows what it's like to balance work plus life. Mm-hmm. But he also is aware enough to realize that didn't hold him back from career opportunities. And females don't have that same experience in most cases. And so he's truly passionate about making the representation, making it so little girls see the change. And it's funny, as we started to put this together, what the math showed, right? Because it is an investment strategy. We care first and foremost that the investment thesis is there and proves out. And he found that in those women-led companies, they generally outperformed 2 to 3% relative to when the male was the CEO. And so there was real data to support just their leadership at that level. So we were excited to launch it. And actually, and kind of talking about it, as we were kind of talking about it and putting it together, it sparked a memory of mine back from when I was probably 8 years old, driving to dance class with my dad. And it's so funny because I haven't thought of it in years, but I remember like exactly the road we were on. And I remember like proudly proclaiming I wanted to be a secretary. And he said, why not just be the boss? And it was like, at that moment, it clicked like, I guess I could. Like, and so I think going back to what you said, Erin, that you have to see it to be it, you've got to see it. And I think we're just really leaning in on that, which is a Carson value too.
Yeah, the other part of the Carson value, before we move on, Anna, I want to make sure we hit on, because statistically speaking, when you look at the industry, and finance is definitely more male oriented anyway, but you look at that first level of management, and that is where you typically see the fall off from males to females. So although we're almost 50-50 when it comes to, the workforce, the spread, that drops when you look into just the first level of management. Women are 10% less than by men. And by the time you get to SVPs or the C-suite, now it's 70% to 30%. One of the things that I don't think Carson really talks about enough is that, yes, not only are we really close in a finance industry that starts off more widely varied, but we are almost even when it comes to males and females in the company. And when you look at the vice president levels and up, we have a tremendous amount of female leadership at those levels and much higher than the industry. And so like that, the Women in Wealth report, but how we live our daily lives, it gives us a microphone. All three of us today have a microphone that I'm not sure that we would have if we were at other locations or other firms. And that's a really cool thing.
For sure. When I was talking to Jake, we kind of brought up the fact that allyship is a verb more than, so like I just really appreciated Jake's story and how, he acknowledged like, yes, I am a man. Yes, I, started this, but this is why. This is like, I want my little girl to have something different. And Jessica, you told me that story about your dad. And I just love that. Then dads are so critical, right? Because I had one of those dads too that was just like, oh, he called me Sniffins. Like, oh, Sniffins, you could do anything you be, So like for the dads out there, it kind of starts with you. So you be like Jessica's dad.
For sure.
Yeah.
I love it. So let's talk a little bit about, the fund, how it ties into current trends in investing and how our advisors in the ecosystem have responded to it. Erin, we could start with you.
Yeah. So I think this goes on to what we're seeing right now is a continuation of trend. People want more. They want different. They want to know that their money is a place of values. And as more women are gaining access to funds, this is becoming more prevalent. Women tend to have much more of I want my investments to align to my values and my beliefs. And a big part of that is, again, representation of women. But what we're finding is that there's a massive lag. There's a time difference between our want and our being able to fulfill this. And Jessica can speak to this much better than I can, because she will know the current trends, specifically investments. But what we see is that there's this lag between education and then fulfillment of roles. And so right now we're at a place where we're looking for more women to come into finance. We're looking for more women to come into technology. But many of these girls are our daughters who are still in elementary school and junior high. And that as those numbers start to increase, the lag will decrease. But we're definitely going to continue seeing that as the needs and the wants are there today. And we're going to continue filling those gaps. But there's going to be some lags as we continue to fill the education requirements and the actual women stepping into these roles.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think so, calling back to a reframe episode that we did with Sandy Call from Franklin Templeton. She had some great research on just kind of the trends in investing. And when it comes to moving from that even client-centric to client-centered. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of it. It all goes back to that human experience is what wins in the long run. And I think the male allyship part of it is so key. And so we know that women, control most of the investable assets, and they're going to continue to do it. And we've also, there's stats out there on how likely they are to leave their current advisor if their spouse passes away. And I would think, there's a ton of male allies out there. And I think if you ask any advisor, they'd say, oh, I'm one of them, right? But are you really? Like, what are you really doing? And that's not to say you have to use this fund to do that, but it goes beyond just talking about it and making it available. It's truly like having the conviction and making the change. And I think we've seen that. And actually, most of the advisors using the Women's CEO Fund are male advisors within the Carson network. So it's great to see that allyship.
For sure. And Jessica, talk to our listeners a little bit about how the strategy, it not only appeals to women investors, right? It's like, I mean, you kind of touched on this a little bit ago, but it's important for all advisors and investors. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's really building that connection with your clients. So again, as the demographic of the investor changes, as things become more personalized, even just in the product sense, the data is out there to really put it behind and support these kind of personalized or customized type strategies. So if you think, a while back, you could have an ESG fund, which this Women's CEO Fund is not an ESG fund, but there, as a screener. And so you got some of the way there. But to get the data to screen everything was very expensive. That's gotten more and more abundant and cheaper. And so the products not only become better, they can actually tune in more to specifically what you're trying to achieve, specific value. So again, the Women's CEO Fund is a very specific fund that you have to be a female in the S&P 500 that is a CEO. And so I think just bringing that in, that's how we're kind of meeting that trend through the actual products themselves.
And Jessica, those points you make about how we're looking at, all people wanting to do this, like there's so much, I think, desire and focus right now on this idea of how do we make things more available. And, there's a quote that Ruth Bader Ginsburg said many years ago. And at the time, it was kind of one of those like, whoa, why would she say that? But the question they asked her was, at what point will you feel comfortable with how many women are in the same role as you? And she responded, when all of us are women. And of course, everyone does this. Wait, what? That is, you can't have all Supreme Court justices be women. But have we ever said that you can't have all Supreme Court justices be men? Nobody would take a thought to that. But I think this idea of, again, people starting to realize that there is diversity out there of all sorts of kinds. And we need to make sure that we're open and inclusive. And this theme is not only going to continue, it's going to be the normal at some point, that we are all equal and of the same, and people are valued for their intelligence and their offerings. But when you look at what all of these investors are bringing, they're trying to help their clients, and their clients have children and granddaughters, and they have daughters that they want to make sure are successful adults, just like our fathers all wanted to make sure we were successful adults, and to have especially men who are the financial advisors and typically the broadest of the category at this point, they're the ones leading it right now, but it's also being led by demand. And that's where I love that our voices are being heard. And I love that Carson is looking at the ecosystem and saying, let's make sure we're filling this gap and we're leading the way, because if we do it, lots of other people will do it too. And then it becomes normal.
Yeah. And I think it's so much, it's a person thing. I think a lot of males out there know that women don't need to bear this burden by themselves, and they're committed to making the change too. I mean, think about it. I mean, Erin and I, we both have a daughter, right? Like, everybody has a little girl in their life. I remember just a couple weeks ago at our partner summit here in Omaha, I was talking to an advisor in their father-daughter duo, and he was talking about his daughter who wasn't there at the time, but he's like, oh yeah, she runs this better business than anybody. She's been the CEO of our family for years. And so I think it's like, we all know that the qualities are there and that they do it well. It's let's start changing the system to make it just that much easier.
For sure. So I'm curious about, like, among the CEOs represented in the fund, Jake had chosen a bunch of his favorites and kind of talked about them. Who are some of your favorites and why?
Yeah, I'll start with that because one, I think Jennifer Rumsey of Cummins. That's just an interesting one for me, because when you think of Cummins, they're big diesel engines, and and so a female running that seems ironic, but it's not, right? Because she has done a ton just for the company when it comes to like supply chain navigations throughout COVID. And, but she's also focused a lot on reducing kind of their vehicle emissions and their global energy initiatives that they have within the company. And so I think she's doing all of it. And at the same time, prices are high, earnings have never been higher, and she's running a really efficient company there. So I like that one. The other one that stands out is, like, I think about, the world is changing, right? When I think of an investment platform, I said we can't stay stagnant. One of the things that's been around forever is elevators, right? Like, we're all used to that. And Judy Marks is the CEO of Otis Worldwide. And so they're an elevator and escalator manufacturer. But what's really neat, and what I think she's doing that she's bringing into that, is just she's looking at AI and how to innovate things. And so, increasing safety, increasing efficiency when it comes to traffic, predicting when that maintenance needs to happen. And so it's bringing these fresh perspectives into something that seems, it's an elevator, right? You knew there was so much cool stuff you could do, but she's doing it. And again, their prices are at all-time highs. And so those are two of my favorite.
That's awesome.
I think my favorite thing about the list is more that these are companies people know. And that representation piece, like, you scroll the list and you're like, oh, wait, UPS is on here? Oh, wait, like, pick another one. I have them in front of me. General Motors Company is on here. Like, all of those, as you're scrolling the list, these are not necessarily firms that, to Jessica's point, they're the S&P 500. These are the most well-known companies we have. But do people know that they're ran by women? Probably not. And that is the part that just stings to me when I look at this. And there's a bunch on the list that I didn't know were run by women. And so it's an eye-opener for me, who is closer to this than most clients would be. And the fact that we're bringing it, right out, here it is, look at it, there's these 30 firms, is just amazing.
Yeah, no, we were doing some social media stuff. So I was writing a bunch of the little features that we have on our social channels, and it was so neat to kind of dive into all of their stories. And I love to do that type of stuff. Just, again, I'm a storyteller. I like to receive stories. I like to tell them. So it was great. But Jessica, you brought up, that how that CEO was bringing in AI and other things to try to, like, drive efficiency. And I was recently at Wealth Management Edge, and kind of AI it had its own track. It was like a big thing, right? So they were talking about it both from the use case for advisors and both from, like, an investment perspective and investment trends. So let's talk about, maybe that, if it's one of your top trends, what are some things that you're tracking and kind of seeing that are some current trends in investing that we're paying attention to here?
Yeah. So that's a great lead into one of our other values, right? We want to stay innovative and refreshing and being on the kind of leading edge of change when it comes to AI. So we actually do have an AI leader strategy as well. And that one really invests in the companies. It's not run by AI, it's run by people. And it invests in companies, but they actually generate their revenue through AI type functions or support. And so that's one. And we've seen a ton of interest there. I think everybody is starting to, I think a while ago, everybody knew it was coming. It's not going to change, right? And now they're saying, okay, how is this going to change for the better? Or what do I need to watch for? And so there's still a little bit of skepticism around it, but you can't ignore that it's going to be part of it. And so we've seen a lot of people come to it. At Carson, I like to sit like we got the pinnacle of kind of the leader there when it comes to Danny Faber, our new chief strategy officer, also a woman, also investing in leadership, but she's fantastic at that. And she's really going to help us create the platform, a lot of what we already have, and then be able to bring, that AI kind of wrapper around it to really optimize that advisor experience and the client experience. So we'll see more where she takes Carson in general, but it's definitely a topic that we're following very close.
From the financial planning side, when we look at the trends, they're a little bit different in the sense that a lot of our trends have to do, of course, with tax laws and estate laws, and all those things change every single year. But how technology, and specifically AI, for example, is starting to play into that. I've been in this position at Carson for 6 years, and when I got here, we had, I think, 50 technologies in the whole financial advice arena. In 1 year, 2019, I had looked at 68 technologies that year. And so we had already seen the growth. But if you look at that today, how fast technology is spurring up and people are implementing aggregators and AI into that. Now, one report I look at has over 100, another one has over 168. That is a very quick change to our technology, and AI has been a great example of that. What we have today won't be what we have in the future. And so when I think about our financial advice technology, I always like to talk about our phones because everyone walks around with a smartphone. We have the ability to either say that we are the smartphone and let everybody else be the apps on it, or we're also going to be all the apps. And I think that is an interesting place for us in this world of how do we make sure that we are the smartphone or we are the library? We're not all the things inside of it, so that we can use the best tools, the best resources, the best investments that are out there, and really give that custom and curated experience to our clients that allows them to get access to the kind of advice they need, the kind of investments they need, and then tracks their financial progress ongoing.
And I think that's where, again, we're going back to kind of how our teams go together. All of that stuff is going to be at the fingertips of everybody. And I think if you think of just planning and you think of just investments, it's that space between that really makes the impact. And so if you're just focusing on scaling or outsourcing those pieces to AI without honing in on that middle and that advice and that personal touch, I think advisors are really going to miss out.
Oh, for sure. And I was remembering what Danny said at Partner Summit, which is really impactful, how just a few years ago she was, oh, tech, but now, oh, the human element is what's going to be most valuable, because there are so many things that people could do, bad actors could do with AI, like deep fakes of your clients' voices. You could be on a Zoom and it might be a deep fake. So always having that, somebody, I can't remember who it was the other day I was interviewing, said, having a safe word with your client, you have to say the word and they confirm it. It's the humanity, it's the advisor aspect, it's the person that's really the value in all of it. But I thought that was so fascinating. It's also fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And it really goes back to what I said originally, we're dealing with people's lives, their financial lives. And the more we know about their life and what's important to them and the people in their lives, the better that we can protect them from those things like deep fakes. But the more that we also can help find them the right tools and resources. And that combination of being human first is really that winning combination.
Absolutely. And this wasn't on the list, but I was kind of inspired. I was watching the video from Partner Summit, just kind of refreshing my memory of your talk. But you talked a little bit about the behavioral finance element. Erin, you have your master's in behavioral finance, that you're very heavily involved in that space. So kind of wanted to get your perspective in relation to trends in investing and how like the behavioral aspect of it kind of drives some of the trends that, you know, clients kind of maybe want or value. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to especially finances, we've all been taught something, whether we realize it or not. And sometimes those are good lessons and sometimes those are bad lessons. But as a person who is an advisor, if you don't understand the idea of starting with a beginner mindset, any time that someone is acting irrational or making decisions that you wouldn't agree with, if you understood where they come from and why they're doing that, it's a lot easier to be like, oh, this makes sense. And so this idea of starting with that beginner mindset and being curious about what are their first money memories? Did their parents have, you know, good success with money, or was it a not favorable experience? And what did they take away from that? That allows us then to put them on a track of what is the things that are going to make the most sense to them. And sometimes that means having to have some real heart-to-heart conversations of, you know, I had a client one time, two clients fighting over how much money was spent on Christmas. And the husband just couldn't understand why the wife went completely over the hill every single time and just credit card blew their budget out of the water 3 times more than they agreed to. And this happened over and over again to the point that he was just losing it. And we started having this conversation about early money memories and what was money like growing up. And she starts talking about how when she was a kid, they didn't celebrate birthdays, they didn't celebrate graduation. Christmas was the only time they ever got anything new. It was the only time they got new clothes. It was the only time they got new shoes. And that was such a special moment to her that when she thinks about Christmas, it was going back to her own memories. And he didn't know this. I mean, he knew that she had, you know, humble beginnings, and he knew it was tough, but he never saw it that way. And she also didn't see that she was trying to create happiness from her own happiness as a child in a life that maybe wasn't so financially happy. And so if you don't have those really like get to know you conversations and use that, you know, I don't even want to say behavioral tools because they're just being human tools. Yeah. And they're helping us get to those deeper underlying possible issues that can help them realize it, overcome it, and have a much more successful future.
Oh, I love that. Well, ladies, this has been so much fun hanging out with you and hearing all your expertise. Well, not all of it. I mean, it's only 30 minutes. Vast, yeah, vast knowledge. But is there anything I didn't ask that you would like to include?
Do you have any questions today, Jessica?
I don't. I feel like I should have come with something, and I didn't.
I know.
I will say, if you are wanting to follow just investment trends and what the Carson research team is thinking, you can always go to carsongroup.com/research for all of our blogs. But also we have a podcast, if it's okay if I plug.
Absolutely.
Facts vs. Feelings with Ryan and Sonia. So you can get deep into what we're thinking on the market and the economy, but in a real understandable way. So check that out.
Yeah. And I have full disclosure, Facts vs. Feelings is my favorite podcast because it's like Ryan and Sonia make it so fun, and it's just so easy to understand if you're not, you know, subject matter expert. So highly recommend it. Please do follow, subscribe, and listen.
Yeah. And the last plug I would like to put in, just because we are finishing up the school year season. You know, Carson is a great supporter of Rock the Street, Wall Street, and it goes hand in hand with everything we've been talking about today. It is a nonprofit organization that focuses on high school girls and financial literacy and really teaching them the skills they need. And so that before they get into college, they have this idea that financial careers exist and that they can go to college and have success. So the women of Carson have been supporting this for the last 2 school years, and we're getting ready to renew for our 3rd school year. And so that ability that not only are, you know, we looking at the Women's CEO Fund, but our volunteer work is also supporting women and helping, you know, get more representation into this industry.
I love it. Well, thank you, ladies, so much. All right, listeners, you have your marching orders. Let's check out Rock the Street, Wall Street. Maybe make a donation if you're feeling generous today. Go subscribe to Facts vs. Feelings. You will not be disappointed. And thank you all for tuning into this week's episode of the Framework Podcast. Please subscribe here also so you don't miss another episode.